In the bitter cold of a Wyoming winter, where hope seems as scarce as warmth, an extraordinary tale of kindness is about to unfold. June Callahan, a pregnant widow living in an abandoned farmhouse, has nothing left but her late husband's coat and the child growing inside her. When she spots a ragged stranger collapsed in the snow, she gives him that last precious coat, never knowing he's actually Colt Merrick, a billionaire rancher in disguise, searching his own ghost town for something money can't buy: genuine human connection. Her simple act of kindness will spark a chain of events that neither of them could have imagined. But can love bloom in a place where secrets run as deep as winter snow? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The gold band on June Callahan's finger caught the last rays of sunlight as she twisted it, a nervous habit she'd developed since Marcus died. 4 months felt like 4 lifetimes ago. Now, as darkness crept across the Wyoming sky, she wondered if the ring might be worth enough to keep the heat on for another week. The thought made her stomach clench with shame. Frost patterns crept up the farmhouse windows like delicate fingers reaching for warmth. June pulled her late husband's coat tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the fading scent of leather and hay that still clung to the worn fabric. The coat was all she had left of him, besides the baby growing inside her and a stack of unpaid medical bills on the kitchen table. She'd found this abandoned farmhouse on the outskirts of Lost River 2 weeks ago. The town itself was barely more than a collection of empty storefronts and weathered buildings, a ghost of what it once had been. But the farmhouse, despite its drafty windows and creaking floors, offered shelter from the bitter winter wind. Marcus would have known how to fix the ancient furnace in the basement. He'd always been good with his hands, whether it was mending fences or breaking horses. The memory of him at their small ranch, showing off his newest trick at the rodeo, brought tears to her eyes. "Just watch this, Junebug," he'd say, that cocky grin lighting up his face. She never imagined that same confidence would lead him to attempt a dangerous stunt that would cost him his life. The baby kicked, a gentle reminder that she wasn't entirely alone. June placed her hand over her swollen belly, whispering, "I know, little one, we'll figure something out." She was 5 months along now, and the doctor had warned her about her blood pressure at her last checkup. Not that she could afford another visit any time soon. In the kitchen, she stirred a pot of thin soup, watching the few vegetables she had left swirl in the broth. The meager meal would have to last until she could find work in town. Not many places were hiring, especially not a pregnant widow with no fixed address. But June had inherited her mother's stubborn streak, along with her recipe for stretching ingredients to feed a family through hard times. The wind howled outside, rattling the loose shutters. June moved to the window, peering out at the deserted Main Street. Lost River hadn't always been this empty. Old-timers at the diner where she'd stopped last week spoke of better days, when the ranches were thriving and the streets were filled with life. Now it was just another dying town in a state full of them, holding on by weather-worn threads to whatever glory it once had. Night settled over the valley like a heavy blanket, bringing with it temperatures that made the pipes groan in protest. June gathered every blanket she could find, making a nest on the old couch near the kitchen, where the lingering heat from cooking would keep her warm longest. Tomorrow she'd try the general store again, see if they needed help stocking shelves or running the register. Mr. Peterson had seemed sympathetic to her situation, even if he couldn't offer her work last time. As she drifted off to sleep, one hand resting protectively over her belly, June's fingers found the wedding ring again. The gold felt cold against her skin, like all the promises that had frozen with Marcus's last breath. But she couldn't bring herself to sell it. Not yet. Some things were worth more than money, even if they couldn't keep you warm at night. Outside, The winter wind continued its mournful song across the empty streets of Lost River, carrying with it the whispers of change that would soon sweep through this forgotten corner of Wyoming, bringing with it an unexpected thaw to a heart frozen by loss and a love story that would become part of local legend. The storm hit Lost River like a hungry wolf, all howling winds and biting cold. June hadn't meant to stay out so late, but Mr. Peterson had finally offered her 2 hours of inventory work at the general store. The $20 in her pocket felt like a fortune, even if it wouldn't stretch far enough to cover both food and heat. She pulled Marcus's coat tighter against the wind as she made her way back to the farmhouse. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees since sunset, and the snow was coming down in thick, angry swirls. That's when she saw him, a dark shape slumped against the wall of the abandoned gas station, barely visible through the curtain of white. At first, she thought he might be a pile of discarded clothes, but then she saw movement, a slight shifting that spoke of life. June hesitated. In the growing darkness, approaching a stranger wasn't wise, but something about the way he huddled there, shoulders curved against the cold, struck a chord deep in her heart. "Sir," her voice was nearly lost in the wind. "Are you all right?" The figure stirred, lifting his head slightly. Even in the dim light, she could see his face was weathered, like old leather left too long in the sun. His clothes were worn thin, completely inadequate for the brutal Wyoming winter. A threadbare flannel shirt, jeans with holes at the knees, and boots that had seen better days. No coat. "I'm fine, ma'am," he managed, but his voice was rough with cold, and his lips had a bluish tinge that sent alarm bells ringing through June's mind. Just resting a spell. June knew hypothermia when she saw it. Marcus had taught her the signs during their first winter on the ranch. This man was in trouble, whether he admitted it or not. Without thinking too hard about it, she shrugged off. "Marcus's coat. Here," she said, holding it out. "Take it." The man's eyes widened slightly, revealing a startling shade of blue. "Ma'am, I couldn't." "You can and you will." June's mother had always said she got her stubborn streak honest. "There's a shelter in Rawlins, about 40 miles south. They'll have beds available this time of night." She draped the coat over his shoulders, noticing how he stiffened at the contact, like someone unused to accepting help. "But His gaze dropped to her pregnant belly, visible now without the coat's bulk. "I've got somewhere warm to go." June lied, thinking of the drafty farmhouse. "You clearly don't." He reached into his back pocket, pulling out a worn leather wallet. "At least let me—" "No." June stepped back, arms wrapped around herself against the cold. "Just take care of the coat. It belonged to someone special." Before he could protest further, she turned and hurried away, snow crunching under her. Boots. She didn't see how the man's hands trembled as he opened the wallet, revealing not the expected few crumpled dollars, but a platinum credit card and a driver's license bearing the name Colt Merrick. Nor did she see how he watched her disappear into the storm, his expression a mixture of wonder and something deeper, like a man who'd been searching for something without knowing what it was, until he found it. The walk back to the farmhouse was the coldest of June's life. By the time she reached the door, her fingers were numb and her teeth chattering violently. But as she huddled under every blanket she owned, trying to warm up, she couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. Marcus would have done the same thing. He'd always said that kindness was never wasted, even if it seemed foolish at the time. Still, as the wind rattled the windows and seeped through every crack in the old house's walls, June allowed herself one moment of weakness. She pressed her face into the blankets and cried, for Marcus, for their baby, for the coat that still smelled like him, and for all the warmth she'd lost. The tears froze on her cheeks before she could wipe them away. Outside, the storm raged on, but something had shifted in Lost River that night. Like the first subtle crack in river ice before the spring thaw, a change was coming. One that would start with an empty wallet, a borrowed coat, and two hearts about to discover that sometimes the greatest acts of kindness come disguised as simple necessity. Colt Merrick stood in his private office at the Lost River Ranch, staring at the deed spread across his mahogany desk. The yellowing document, dated 30 years ago, bore his father's signature at the bottom, the last thing James Merrick had signed before his heart gave out. In his father's spidery handwriting was a note in the margin: "Build something that matters, son." The borrowed coat hung on a hook by the door, its worn leather a stark contrast to the office's understated luxury. He'd changed back into his usual clothes, custom-made wool suit, Italian leather shoes, but found himself drawn to that weathered coat and the remarkable woman who'd given it to him. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Lost River stretched out below like an abandoned movie set. He'd bought the entire town 5 years ago, dreaming of restoration, of bringing life back to the place his father had loved. But something had held him back. Perhaps it was the way people changed when they discovered who he was. Their eyes, taking on that hungry gleam, their words becoming carefully crafted hooks baited with flattery. His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "Mr. Merrick, the board is waiting for your video call." "Cancel it," he said, fingers tracing the deed's faded text. "And Sarah, what can you tell me about a pregnant widow who might be staying in the old Johnston farmhouse?" The silence on the other end spoke volumes. Sarah had been with him for 15 years, long enough to know when something had shifted in her employer's world. "I'll look into it right away, sir." Colt moved to the window, watching as snow erased his footprints from the previous night. He'd spent weeks walking his own streets in disguise, searching for something, the town's potential maybe, or his father's ghost. Instead, he'd found an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. The woman's face haunted him. No recognition had flickered in her eyes when she looked at him, no calculation in her gesture. Just pure, simple kindness, offered without expectation of return. When was the last time anyone had given him anything without wanting something back? Sarah's voice returned. "June Callahan, sir. 28 years old. Widow of Marcus Callahan. Former rodeo rider. He died 4 months ago in Cheyenne. Medical bills wiped out their savings. The farmhouse she's staying in, it's one of your properties." Of course it was. Everything in Lost River belonged to him, though he'd done precious little with any of it. The town had become his own private museum of missed opportunities and good intentions. "Her condition?" he asked, though he already knew the answer would trouble him. "According to records from the Rawlins Clinic, she's 5 months pregnant. Some concerns about blood pressure. She hasn't been back for follow-up appointments." Sarah paused. "Sir, she's been looking for work. Every business in town has turned her down because they were all barely hanging on themselves." The irony didn't escape him. He owned a ghost town full of struggling businesses, and the one person who'd shown him genuine kindness couldn't find work in any of them. "The coat," he said softly, more to himself than Sarah. "She said it belonged to someone special. Her late husband's, according to my sources. It's all she had left of him, sir." The weight of that sacrifice settled over him like a physical thing. Colt crossed to the coat and slipped his hand into its pocket, feeling something crinkle. A sonogram picture, creased and worn, as if it had been handled often. On the back, in delicate handwriting, "Baby Callahan, 18 weeks. He thought of his father's last words to him: "Build something that matters." For 5 years, he'd interpreted that to mean buildings, businesses, infrastructure. But standing there, holding a stranger's coat and her unborn child's first picture, Colt Merrick began to wonder if he'd been reading his father's message all wrong. "Sarah," he said, his voice taking on the quiet certainty that had built his fortune, "draw up some papers. I think it's time Lost River had a proper property manager, someone who knows what it means to care for things that matter." Outside his window, the winter sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the snow-covered street. In one of those shadows, a lone figure made her way toward the general store, arms wrapped tight against the cold. Colt watched until she disappeared from view, the deed to Lost River forgotten on his desk. The "Help Wanted" notice appeared in the general store window on a Tuesday morning, printed on cream-colored paper that stood out among the faded community flyers. June almost missed it. Her attention focused on counting out exact change for a can of soup. But Mr. Peterson's weathered finger tapped the glass as she turned to leave. "Might interest you," he said, his kind eyes crinkling. "Ranch manager position. Up at Lost River Ranch. Housing included." June's heart stuttered. Housing included. The words sang like a choir in her mind, even as her pride wrestled with hope. She moved closer to the window, reading the elegant text, "Seeking property manager for historic Lost River Ranch. Experience with small-town operations preferred. Position includes private residence, medical benefits, and competitive salary. Inquire at the main house." "Medical benefits," she whispered, one hand unconsciously moving to her belly. Mr. Peterson nodded sagely. "Way I hear it, the owner's finally taking an interest in the place. Been empty too long, that big house. Might be just what this town needs. Might be just what you need too, June." The ranch house stood at the edge of town, a sprawling structure of stone and timber that had always seemed more legend than reality to June. She'd passed it countless times, but never seen any signs of life. Now, as she made her way up the long drive, each step felt like tempting fate. A woman in a crisp blazer opened the door before June could knock. "Mrs. Callahan? I'm Sarah Matthews. We've been expecting you." Her smile was professional, but warm. "Please come in out of the cold." The interior of the ranch house took June's breath away. Not because of its obvious luxury, though that was apparent in every carefully chosen piece of furniture, but because of the warmth. After weeks in the drafty farmhouse, the heat wrapping around her felt like a physical embrace. "Through here, please." Sarah led her to a study where a fire crackled in a stone hearth. "Mr. Merrick will be with you shortly." June's fingers worried at her worn sweater. She should have dressed better, should have. "Mrs. Callahan." The voice came from behind her, rich and somehow familiar. "Thank you for coming." She turned and found herself looking into startlingly blue eyes. Recognition flickered at the edges of her mind, but the man before her was impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his manner quietly confident. Nothing like the desperate stranger she'd given Marcus's coat to. "And yet, the position," he continued smoothly, gesturing to a leather chair near the fire, "involves overseeing various properties in town. Many need renovation, others need tenants. We're looking for someone who understands small towns, who can see the potential in things others might overlook." June sat carefully, warmth from the fire seeping into her bones. "I don't have property management experience, Mr. Merrick." "No," he agreed, studying her with those familiar eyes. "But you have something more valuable: integrity, compassion, the ability to make difficult decisions in challenging circumstances." A flutter of unease passed through her. How could he know anything about her? Unless... She pushed the thought away, focusing instead on the opportunity before her. The posting mentioned housing. The caretaker's cottage, just behind the main house. 2 bedrooms, recently renovated. Full medical coverage would begin immediately. He paused, and something softened in his expression. The previous property. Manager's wife was a nurse. She maintained a small clinic in town for emergencies. We'd like to restart that service. June's throat tightened. Everything she desperately needed, wrapped up in a single offer that felt too good to be true. "Why me, Mr. Merrick?" He moved to his desk, picking up a folder. "Your references speak highly of you. Mr. Peterson, particularly, mentioned your determination to find work despite difficult circumstances, but there was something else in his voice, something left unsaid that tugged at her memory. The way he stood by the fire, shadows playing across his features. "The position is yours," he said quietly, "if you want it." June looked down at her worn shoes against the polished wooden floor, thinking of the farmhouse's cold rooms, of the baby growing inside her, of Marcus's voice telling her to never let pride stand in the way of survival. "When would you need me to start?" "Immediately." He held out a set of keys. ancient iron on a new ring. "Welcome to Lost River Ranch, Mrs. Callahan." As June reached for the keys, their fingers brushed. For a moment, she could have sworn she saw him wearing Marcus's coat, huddled against a gas station wall in a snowstorm. But that was impossible, wasn't it? The caretaker's cottage looked like something from a fairy tale, with its river stone chimney and snow-dusted evergreens standing guard. June stood in the doorway of what was now her home, a small box of belongings at her feet. Everything she owned in the world. The sound of Sarah's car crunching back up the gravel drive faded into the winter quiet. "Well, little one," she whispered, touching her belly, "what do you think?" Her answer came in the form of a flutter of movement, as if the baby approved of the warm air wrapping around them. The cottage had been prepared for her arrival, heat running, lights on, and a fully stocked kitchen that made her eyes sting with grateful tears. But it was the small envelope on the kitchen counter that changed everything. Inside, she found a medical appointment card for Lost River's newly reopened clinic, scheduled for that afternoon. Beneath it was a grainy black and white image that made her heart stop. Her first sonogram from months ago, the one she'd kept in Marcus's coat pocket. She traced the familiar shape with trembling fingers, remembering the stranger in the storm. The blue eyes that had seemed so familiar in Mr. Merrick's study. Could it be? A knock at the door scattered her thoughts. Dr. Emily Chen stood on her porch, medical bag in hand, her silver hair caught in the winter sunlight. "Mrs. Callahan, I'm the new clinic doctor. Mr. Merrick mentioned you might appreciate a house call for your first appointment." June found herself led to her own couch, the doctor's gentle efficiency brooking no argument. As the ultrasound machine hummed to life, a portable version far newer than anything she'd seen at the Rawlins Clinic, June caught a glimpse of the doctor's credentials. Chief of Obstetrics, Presbyterian Hospital, retired. "How did Mr. Merrick convince you to come to Lost River?" June asked as the cold gel was applied to her belly. Dr. Chen's eyes crinkled. "Let's just say he can be very persuasive when it comes to looking after his people." She adjusted the wand, and suddenly the room filled with a rapid whooshing sound. "There we are. Strong heartbeat, good size for 22 weeks. Would you like to know the gender?" June nodded, tears blurring her vision as a clear image appeared on the screen. "It's a boy," Dr. Chen said softly, "and he's perfect." After the doctor left, June sat in the growing dusk, holding the new sonogram picture next to the old one. Her son, Marcus's son, a piece of her husband that would live on, growing stronger every day. The thought filled her with a bittersweet ache. She had just enough energy to unpack her few belongings before exhaustion overtook her. The bedroom welcomed her with a new mattress and quilts that smelled of lavender. On the bedside table, she found a leather-bound notebook with a note in elegant handwriting for keeping track of town properties. Sleep came easier than it had in months, but her dreams were a confused mix of snowstorms and blue eyes, of Marcus's laugh and Mr. Merrick's quiet intensity. She woke to sunlight streaming through fresh curtains and the realization that she had work to do. The morning brought Sarah with a stack of property files and a thermos of herbal tea. "Doctor's orders," she said with a wink. "No coffee until after the baby comes." June spent the morning learning the extent of what she'd be managing. Lost River wasn't just a town. It was a tapestry of interconnected properties, each with its own history and potential. The old theater with its Art Deco facade, the row of empty storefronts that had once been a thriving main street, the community center that needed just a little love to become something special again. "Mr. Merrick trusts your judgment," Sarah explained, showing her how to access the renovation budget. "He says sometimes it takes fresh eyes to see what's possible." But it was the last file that caught June's breath. A familiar farmhouse stood out in the property photo, the one she'd so recently called home. Next to it, a simple notation in Mr. Merrick's handwriting: "Priority renovation. Potential young family housing." June closed the file, her hand resting protectively over her belly. The pieces were there, waiting to be assembled into understanding, but something held her back from fitting them together. Perhaps some mysteries were better left unsolved, at least for now. Outside her window, Lost River waited, its empty buildings, like blank pages ready to be filled with new stories. And somewhere in that big ranch house on the hill, a man with familiar blue eyes was giving her the chance to write one of her own. The business magazine had been buried under renovation proposals. On June's desk, its glossy cover showing a younger Colt Merrick standing before the Denver skyline. "The Invisible Billionaire," the headline declared. How Colt Merrick built an empire while staying out of the spotlight. June might never have noticed it if she hadn't knocked the stack over while reaching for her tea. Now, staring at the photograph, pieces started clicking into place. The familiar eyes, the way he stood, the gesture she'd seen 100 times as he pushed his hair back from his forehead during their morning meetings. But before she could process this revelation, another wave of dizziness hit her. They were coming more frequently now, these spells that Dr. Chen had warned her about, pre-eclampsia. The words hung in her office like an unwelcome guest. "June?" His voice came from the doorway, genuine concern threading through it. Sarah said, "You weren't feeling well?" She quickly slid the magazine under a folder, not ready to confront that truth yet. "I'm fine, Mr. Merrick, just a little tired." He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, and for a moment she saw again the vulnerable stranger from the gas station. The same intensity in his eyes, the same careful way of holding himself as if afraid to reveal too much. "Dr. Chen called me," he said quietly. "You should be resting. There's too much work." June gestured at the plans spread across her desk. The theater renovation, the Main Street revival, the community center's new programs. In just 3 weeks, she'd fallen in love with this town and its possibilities. "The contractor needs these approvals by June." He rarely used her first name, and it stopped her mid-sentence. "The town has waited 5 years. It can wait another day." She looked up at him then, really looked, and saw both versions of him, overlaid, the powerful businessman and the man who'd accepted her coat with humility. "Why didn't you tell me?" For a moment, she thought he might pretend not to understand. Instead, he picked up the magazine she'd tried to hide. "Because for the first time in years, someone saw me as just a person. Not a bank account, not a business opportunity, just me." The baby kicked sharply, making June wince. Colt's hand moved instinctively toward her before pulling back. But in that aborted gesture she saw everything he'd been trying to hide, the loneliness, the concern, the growing attachment he didn't quite know how to handle. "The coat," she said softly. "You knew exactly who I was when you offered me this job. I knew who you were the moment you gave a freezing stranger your last bit of warmth." He set the magazine down. "The job offer wasn't charity, June. Lost. River needs someone who can see its heart, not just its balance sheet." Another wave of dizziness swept over her, stronger this time. She gripped the desk edge, trying to hide it, but Colt was already moving. His hand under her elbow was steady, grounding. "That's it," he said, his voice brooking no argument. "Sarah can handle the contractors. You're going home to rest." "I can drive." "Like hell you can." The words came out rough with worry, and she heard in them an echo of Marcus's protective nature that made her heart ache. The walk to his truck was silent, snow crunching under their feet. He helped her in with that same careful restraint, as if touching her too much might break something fragile between them. But when another dizzy spell hit halfway home, his hand found hers without hesitation. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words escaping before she could catch them. "The baby." "I know." His grip tightened. "But you're not alone anymore, June. Whatever you need, doctors, specialists, anything, it's yours." She turned to look at him, this man who'd hidden his identity just to find something real. "Why do you care so much?" Colt kept his eyes on the snowy road, but she saw the muscle in his jaw working. "Because sometimes a single act of kindness can wake a person up, make them remember who they wanted to be before the world got in the way." As he pulled up to her cottage, fat snowflakes starting to fall, June realized that some truths were harder to hide than others, like the way his hand lingered when he helped her down, or how her heart beat faster when he stood close, or how, somehow, giving away a coat had given her back something she thought she'd lost forever, the capacity to hope. The old Christmas ornament caught the late afternoon light, sending prisms dancing across the community center walls. June held the delicate glass snowflake up, admiring how its hand-painted details had survived decades in storage. "My mother made that," Colt said from behind her. "She painted one every Christmas, right up until she died." His voice carried a warmth she was hearing more often lately, as if the walls he'd built around himself were slowly thawing. They were alone in the community center, surrounded by boxes of decorations found in the building's attic. The town's first Christmas festival in 5 years was scheduled for the weekend, part of June's revival plan. Though Dr. Chen had ordered bed rest, she'd been allowed this one afternoon of light activity. "It's beautiful," June said, carefully wrapping the snowflake in tissue paper. "But shouldn't this be on your tree at the ranch house?" Colt moved closer, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "The ranch house hasn't had a Christmas tree since my parents died. Besides," he picked up another ornament, this one a delicate angel. "Mom always said beautiful things should be shared." The baby kicked, as if agreeing, and June's hand went automatically to her side. Without thinking, Colt's hand followed, resting gently over hers. The moment stretched between them, delicate as spun glass. "He's active today," Colt said softly, not moving his hand. "He knows his property manager is nearby." June attempted humor, but her voice caught on the word. What was Colt to her now? Her boss, certainly. The stranger she'd helped, unexpectedly. And something else, something growing between them that neither dared name. Colt's thumb moved in a small circle over her hand, sending warmth spreading through her chest. "June! Mr. Merrick!" Sarah's voice rang out from the entrance, breaking the moment. "The contractor needs to speak with you about the theater renovation." Colt stepped back, his professional mask sliding back into place, though his eyes stayed warm. "We'll finish here later." June nodded, watching him leave with Sarah. Only then did she let out the breath she'd been holding, her heart racing in a way that had nothing to do with her condition. She turned back to the decorations, trying to focus on the task at hand. The festival would bring the whole town together, the first real celebration Lost River had seen in years. Mr. Peterson was organizing a bake sale, the high school choir had been practicing carols, and even Dr. Chen had agreed to set up a booth, offering free health screenings. As she worked, June found herself humming Christmas carols, something she hadn't done since Marcus died. The pain of his loss was still there, but it had changed somehow, softened at the edges. Like the old ornaments, memories could be both fragile and enduring. Near the bottom of one box, she found a small leather pouch. Inside was another snowflake ornament, half finished, the paintbrushes still wrapped in their original paper. On the back, in faded ink, "For Colt's first Christmas as a father. Love, Mom." June's throat tightened. She knew from Sarah that Colt's mother had died unexpectedly, leaving so many things unfinished, including this ornament, meant for a future. "That never came. I thought I'd lost that." She turned to find Colt in the doorway again, his eyes fixed on the unfinished ornament. The setting sun through the windows caught his profile, and for a moment he looked young and vulnerable. "Your mother's last project." He nodded, crossing the room to stand beside her. "She died that October. I found out later she'd been planning. Christmas presents months in advance, always did." He took the ornament gently, turning it in his hands. "I searched everywhere for this." Without thinking, June reached out and caught a tear sliding down his cheek. The touch seemed to surprise them both, but neither pulled away. "Come to Christmas dinner," she said suddenly, "at my cottage. It won't be fancy, but—" Yes, the word came quickly, as if he'd been waiting to be asked. His free hand caught hers where it still rested against his face. On one condition. What's that? Call me Colt, please. At least when we're alone. The way he said it, like a prayer and a promise, all at once made her shiver. All right, Colt. Outside, snow began to fall, soft and steady. Inside, surrounded by memories and possibilities, two hearts beat a little faster, and an unfinished ornament held the promise of new beginnings. The hospital bill lay on June's bedside table at Lost River Regional Medical Center, its total obscured by a bold red, paid in full stamp. She stared at it through eyes blurry with medication, trying to make sense of the zeros that followed the first number. A week's stay in the high-risk maternity ward didn't come cheap. She knew that much. Stop thinking so loud, Dr. Chen scolded, gently adjusting June's IV. Your blood pressure is finally stabilizing. Let's keep it that way. June hadn't meant to scare everyone. She'd been hanging the last of the Christmas decorations at the community center when the room started spinning. The last thing she remembered was Colt's voice, sharp with fear, calling her name as the world went black. Now, a week later, the Christmas festival had come and gone without her. But according to Sarah's daily reports, it had been a tremendous success. The whole town turning out despite the snow, children caroling in the streets, Mr. Peterson's gingerbread cookies selling out within an hour. He hasn't left, you know, Dr. Chen said quietly, nodding toward the hallway where Colt's tall figure paced, visible through the glass door. He'd been there every day, working remotely from a laptop, speaking in hushed tones on his phone, but never far from June's room. He doesn't have to stay, June protested weakly. I'm fine now. Dr. Chen's knowing look cut through June's pretense. Honey, that man hasn't been fine since they brought you in. Nearly fired the entire emergency room staff when they made him wait outside. A memory surfaced through the haze of the past week, Colt's face above hers as they loaded her into the ambulance, his fingers intertwined with hers, voice rough as... He promised, I've got you, June, both of you, just hold on. The baby kicked, strong and reassuring. They'd almost lost him, Dr. Chen had explained. If June hadn't been at the community center, if Colt hadn't been there to catch her, if the helicopter he'd summoned hadn't arrived so quickly, the door opened quietly, and Colt stepped in. He'd abandoned his usual suits days ago, wearing jeans, and a soft flannel shirt that made him look more like the stranger from the gas station than the billionaire from the magazine cover. Sarah brought some things from your cottage, he said, setting a small overnight bag on the chair. His eyes caught the bill on the table, and something flickered across his face. June, how did you do it? She interrupted. This hospital, it's an hour away by car. They don't even take my insurance. They do now. He moved closer, running a hand through hair that hadn't seen a comb in days. I bought it. The hospital. June's heart monitor betrayed her spike of shock. You... What? Well, technically, Merrick Healthcare Solutions bought it, along with the medical group that owns the Lost River Clinic. He wouldn't meet her eyes. It made sense. The town needs proper medical care. The town needs... He trailed off, looking lost. Colt. She reached for his hand, and he took it like a drowning man clutching a lifeline. You can't buy a hospital every time I have a health scare. Watch. Me? The fierce protectiveness in his voice made her shiver. Then, softer, I can't lose you. Either of you. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. June felt tears sliding down her cheeks. I'm not yours to lose, aren't you? His thumb brushed over her knuckles. You gave me your coat that night. But I think you gave me back my heart, too. Dr. Chen chose that moment to clear her throat. Pointedly. Neither of them had noticed she was still in the room. As your doctor, I remind you that emotional upheaval isn't recommended right now. But she was smiling as she headed for the door. As your friend, I'll just say it's about damn time. When they were alone, Colt perched carefully on the edge of June's bed. I know it's too soon, he said quietly. I know you're still healing, still grieving, but I needed you to know, whatever happens, whatever you decide, I'm here, for both of you. June looked at their joined hands, thinking of Marcus, of promises made and broken by fate. Then she thought of a cold night and a borrowed coat, of Christmas ornaments and untold stories, of a man who would buy a hospital just to keep her safe. "I'm scared," she whispered. "Me too." He brought their linked hands to rest over her belly, where the baby kicked in greeting. "But I'm more scared of not trying." Outside her window, snow fell in lazy spirals, each flake catching the light like one of his mother's glass ornaments. Inside, two hearts beat in sync with a third, smaller. One, while a hospital bill marked paid, testified to the lengths love would go to protect its own. The newspaper article was waiting in June's cottage mailbox when she returned from the hospital. Lost River's secret savior, billionaire Colt Merrick's grand plan revealed. Below the headline was a photo of Colt carrying her to the ambulance. His face tight with worry, her unconscious form cradled against his chest. The article was everywhere in town, plastered in the diner's window, being discussed in hushed whispers at the general store, passed between curious hands at the post office. June read it, standing in her kitchen, her fingers trembling. Sources confirm that Merrick, whose net worth exceeds $4.2 billion, has been quietly orchestrating Lost River's renaissance through proxy companies, recent purchase of regional medical center, widespread property acquisitions, local. Rumors suggest romantic involvement with pregnant widow June Callahan, former recipient of his charitable intervention. Charitable intervention. The words burned like acid in her throat. A knock at the door made her jump. Colt stood there, snow dusting his shoulders, holding a paper bag from the pharmacy. "Dr. Chen asked me to bring your prescriptions." He stopped, seeing the newspaper in her hands. "June, I can explain." "Charitable intervention," her voice cracked. "Is that what I am? A project?" "No." He stepped forward, but she backed away. "June, please. $4 billion. She laughed, but it came out more like a sob. "You let me give you my coat, my last coat. When you could have bought every coat in Wyoming. That coat meant more to me than anything money could buy." He set the pharmacy bag on the counter, his movements careful, like he was approaching a wounded animal. "Because you gave it without knowing who I was, without wanting anything in return. And now everyone knows exactly who you are. And who I am." June's hand covered her belly protectively. The poor, pregnant widow, saved by the generous billionaire. "Tell me, was this all part of your grand plan for Lost River? Buy the town, find some sympathetic local to manage it, create a heartwarming story for the press?" Pain flashed across his face. "You think I planned this? Planned falling in?" He caught himself, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I came to Lost River looking for something real, something that couldn't be bought, and you gave me that, June, not just the coat. You gave me a reason to believe in genuine kindness again, by lying to me, by letting you see me, the real me. Not the bank account, not the business empire, just me." He moved closer, and this time she didn't back away. "Every moment with you has been real. Every feeling, every dream of what we could be, all of it real." June touched the newspaper photo, tracing his worried expression. "You bought a hospital for me. I'd have bought every hospital in the state, if it meant keeping you safe." His voice dropped to a whisper. "I'd give away every penny I have, just to see you smile again. That's the problem, isn't it?" She looked up at him, tears spilling over. "You can solve any problem by throwing money at it, fix any situation, save any damsel in distress. But you can't buy trust, Colt, and you can't buy love." The baby kicked then, hard enough to make her wince. Colt's hand moved automatically toward her belly, stopping just short of touching her. The gesture, so instinctive and yet so restrained, broke something in June's heart. "I never wanted to save you," he said quietly. "You saved me. That night in the snow, you didn't just give me a coat. You gave me hope, showed me that real kindness still exists, that maybe I could be more than just a number in a bank account." He reached into his jacket and pulled out something that made June's breath catch, the original sonogram picture from Marcus's coat pocket, worn soft at the edges from being carried every day. I've kept this since that night, he said, holding it out to her, to remind me that sometimes the most precious things in life can't be measured in dollars, that real wealth isn't about what you have, but what you're willing to give away. June took the sonogram with trembling fingers, remembering the night she'd given away her last warm possession to a stranger. I don't know how to trust this. Trust us. Everything's so complicated now. Then let's make it simple. Colt took her free hand, pressing it over his heart. I'm still that man in the snow, June. Still someone who needs your warmth. Still someone who's falling in love with you, money or no money. The only question is, can you love him too? Outside, the town buzzed with the revelation of their story. But in June's cottage, surrounded by the evidence of both truth and deception, two people stood on the edge of a decision that had nothing to do with wealth or status, and everything to do with the courage to trust again. The unfinished baby blanket sat in June's lap, her fingers working the yarn mechanically as wind howled outside her cottage windows. The weather service had warned about this storm, the worst in Wyoming's recent history, but the reality of it still took her breath away. Much like the man currently securing her windows against the onslaught. "You don't have to stay," she said, not looking up from the pale blue yarn. "I'm sure you have more important things to do than babysit me during a blizzard." Colt paused in his work, and she could feel his eyes on her. 3 days had passed since the newspaper article. 3 days of awkward distances and careful words. He'd respected her need for space while somehow managing to ensure she had everything she needed. Groceries delivered, prescriptions filled, Dr. Chen checking in daily. "The entire town is shut down," he said quietly. "There's nowhere more important for me to be." As if to emphasize his point, the wind shrieked louder, rattling the windows. The power flickered once, twice, then died completely. In the sudden darkness, June felt her heart rate spike. "June," Colt's voice held barely contained worry, "where's your emergency kit?" "Under the kitchen sink." She tried to keep her voice steady, remembering Dr. Chen's warnings about her blood pressure. "But I'm fine. You should go before the roads get worse." The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness, and she heard him moving through the cottage with familiar ease. A moment later, warm light bloomed as he lit the fireplace and several battery-operated lanterns. "The roads are already impassable," he said, his face ghostly in the lantern light. "Sarah's activated the town's emergency protocol. Everyone's hunkering down where they are." June set aside the unfinished blanket, suddenly unable to pretend normalcy anymore. "So, we're stuck here, together?" "Yes." He met her eyes across the room. "Unless that's truly unbearable for you." The baby chose that moment to kick forcefully, making June gasp. Colt was beside her instantly, professional distance forgotten. "What's wrong? Should I call Dr. Chen?" "He's just active," she managed. But another sharp kick made her wince. "He doesn't like storms." Without asking permission, Colt sat beside her on the couch and placed his hand on her belly. The baby settled immediately, as if recognizing his touch. The simple intimacy of the moment brought tears to June's eyes. "I'm so angry with you," she whispered, but she didn't move his hand away. "I know. You let me believe you were penniless. Let me give you Marcus's coat. I know that too." His thumb moved in small circles, soothing both her and the baby. "But that night, for the first time in years, someone saw me as just a man, not a fortune, not a business opportunity, just someone who needed help." The wind moaned around the barn and cottage corners, but inside the fire crackled steadily. June found herself leaning into his warmth, despite her resolution to maintain distance. "You've been carrying so much," Colt continued softly. "The grief, the baby, the uncertainty. Let me help you carry it, June. Not with money, not with grand gestures, just with love." The word hung in the air between them, as delicate as the snowflakes battering the windows. June's hands found the unfinished blanket again, fingers tracing the pattern she'd been trying to complete for weeks. "I started this the day I found out I was pregnant," she said. "Marcus was so excited. He went out that same day and bought enough yarn for 10. Blankets said our baby deserved the softest things in life. Her voice caught, but I couldn't finish it after he died, couldn't even look at it until you started looking at me the way he did, like I was something precious, something worth protecting. She met his eyes in the firelight. But I'm not some damsel you need to save, Colt. I'm not a charity case or a PR opportunity. No, he agreed, his free hand coming up to cup her cheek. You're the woman who saved me first, who showed me that true wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you're willing to give away. Outside, the storm raged on, but in the cottage, something else was breaking. The ice around June's heart, the walls between truth and deception, the fear of loving again. As another contraction gripped her, too early and too strong, she clutched Colt's hand. Something's wrong, she whispered, real fear coloring her voice. The baby! His response was immediate, gathering her into his arms. Hold on, love, just hold on. I've got you both. In the firelight, the unfinished blanket lay forgotten, its loose ends waiting to be woven into something whole again, much like the two hearts beating frantically in the storm-wrapped darkness. The letters were scattered across June's hospital room floor, spilled from an old folder that had fallen from Colt's coat as he paced. She picked one up with trembling fingers, her other hand resting on her now stable belly. The paper was weathered, the ink faded, but her father-in-law's signature at the bottom was unmistakable. Thomas Callahan, Mayor of Lost River, 1985-2010. Dear Mr. Merrick, she read aloud, making Colt freeze in his tracks. I write to decline your latest offer for Lost River properties. This town isn't just real estate, it's a community of people who've weathered every storm together. If you're serious about buying it, come see what we're fighting to preserve. Bring your checkbook, but more importantly, bring your heart. Your father-in-law, Colt said quietly, was the only person who ever told me no, who made me see that some things can't be bought. Through the window, the storm still raged, but they were safe now in Lost River Regional's maternity ward. Dr. Chen had arrived just in time, fighting through the blizzard in Colt's heavy-duty truck, directed by emergency workers he'd stationed throughout the town. You knew, June said, reaching for another letter. You knew who I was before that night at the gas station. Before Marcus died, I knew of you. He sat carefully on the edge of her bed. Thomas wrote about his son and daughter-in-law in every letter, the rodeo champion and the girl who taught at the local school. He was so proud of you both, June's. And shook as she read through more letters, years of correspondence between her father-in-law and the man who would eventually buy the town. Thomas's declining health, his worry about Lost River's future, and finally, his last letter. Colt, my boy, because after 5 years of letters, I feel I can call you that. I'm not long for this world. Lost River needs someone who'll see it through the hard times ahead, someone who understands that a town's heart isn't in its buildings, but in its people. You've grown into that person, I think. Just promise me one thing, look after my family. When I'm gone, especially June and Marcus, they represent everything good about this place. I tried. Colt's voice was rough. I set up a trust for the rodeo, made sure Marcus always had sponsorships, watched from a distance as you both lived. The life Thomas wanted for you. And then Marcus died. June touched her belly, feeling their son move. And you couldn't save him. I was in Singapore when I got the news. By the time I got back, he took a shuddering breath. I found you in that farmhouse 2 months later. Couldn't bring myself to approach you directly. How do you tell someone you've been watching over them from afar, that their father-in-law asked you to be their guardian angel? The monitor beside June's bed beeped steadily, a reassuring rhythm in the storm-muffled room. Dr. Chen had assured them the contractions were under control now, that bed rest and medication would keep their boy safe until full term. So you played homeless, June said, understanding dawning. Waited in the cold until I passed by. I needed to know, he admitted, if Thomas was right about you, about the heart of this town. His eyes met hers, vulnerable and honest. I never expected you to give me your coat, your last warm thing. It humbled me completely. June picked up the final letter, dated just weeks before Thomas died. P.S., she read, June's expecting. Our first grandchild. Marcus is over the moon. Promise me you'll make sure that baby grows up in a lost river worth believing in. I promise, Colt whispered, echoing words he must have said years ago, reading. This same letter. The baby kicked, strong and sure, as if sealing a pact between past and present. June reached for Colt's hand, placing it over the spot. You've kept your promise, she said softly. To Thomas, to Lost River, to us. Not yet. He leaned forward, pressing his forehead to hers. But I will, every day for as long as you'll let me. Outside, the storm began to ease, snow falling gentle now instead of fierce. June thought of Marcus, of Thomas, of all the love letters to a town that had brought her and Colt to this moment. I'm not ready to say it back, she whispered. Not yet, but I'm ready to believe in it again. In love, in us. That's enough, he said, gathering her carefully in his arms. For now, that's more than enough. The letters lay scattered around them like fallen leaves, their edges curled with age and handling. But the promises they held were as fresh as the snow outside, as real as the heartbeats they shared, 3 rhythms finding their way to a single song. The renovation plans spread across June's desk at the community center told a story of resurrection. Detailed drawings showed the old theater restored to its Art Deco glory, the main street shops wearing fresh facades, and park spaces blooming where abandoned lots had festered. But it was the small note in Colt's handwriting at the bottom of each page that made her heart skip, subject to JC's approval. The contractor can start whenever you're ready, Colt said from the doorway, 2 cups of herbal tea in hand. 3 weeks since the storm had settled into a comfortable rhythm, him bringing her tea each morning, them working side by side, rebuilding more than just buildings. I was thinking, June said, accepting the tea gratefully, about what Thomas wrote in those letters, about Lost River's heart being in its people, not its buildings. Colt pulled up a chair beside her, close but not touching, respecting the careful dance they'd been doing since her release from the hospital. What about it? Look at this. She pulled out a sketch she'd been working on. The theater's beautiful, but what if we added a community arts program? Acting classes for kids, weekend movie nights for seniors. Make it more than just a building. His face softened as he studied her drawing. Like the writing classes you used to teach at the high school. June blinked, surprised. You knew about those? Thomas bragged about you in every letter. His smile was gentle. The teacher who stayed after hours to help struggling students, who organized poetry readings at the diner. The baby kicked, and June shifted in her chair. Without thinking, Colt's hand moved to support her back, the gesture so natural it made her throat tight. I miss teaching, she admitted. Miss feeling like I was building something more than just walls and windows. So build it again. He turned to the plans, his excitement building. We could convert the upper floor of the theater into classrooms, create a real community arts center. June found herself leaning into his warmth there, shoulders touching as they bent over the drawings. The diner could host open mic nights again. Mr. Peterson was telling me how much he misses those. Speaking of Mr. Peterson, Colt pulled another set of plans from the pile. He mentioned wanting to expand the general store, add a proper pharmacy section, save people the drive to Rawlins for prescriptions. They worked through the morning, their ideas flowing together like tributaries joining a river. June noticed how Colt never imposed his vision, always seeking her input, valuing her connection to the town's people. It was a different kind of courtship, one built on shared dreams and mutual respect. Oh, June stood suddenly, remembering something. The old Callahan house, my in-laws' place. I've been meaning to ask, when you bought the town, it's still in your name, Colt said quietly. Thomas made that a condition of the sale, said it should stay in the family. Family. The word hung between them, heavy with possibility. June rested her hands on her belly, feeling their son move. I've been thinking about that too. The house. It's too big for just us. But, the young couple that just moved to town, the new doctor at the clinic and his wife, they're living in a motel in Rawlins because they can't find a place here. And Sarah mentioned that the high school's having trouble attracting teachers because of the housing shortage. Colt's eyes lit with understanding. You want to convert it into apartments. Teacher housing. June nodded. Medical staff housing. People who will help rebuild Lost River from the inside out. It's what Thomas would have wanted. It's perfect. Colt's hand found hers on the desk. June, everything you touch, you make it about people, about connection. You make it matter. She turned to face him fully, seeing not the billionaire from the magazines, but the man who'd sat in the snow waiting. To prove human kindness still existed. You do too, you know. All those years, reading Thomas's letters, caring about this town, you were building something that mattered long before you met me. Maybe, he said softly, but you make me want to build something more, something lasting. His free hand moved to her belly, where their son kicked in greeting. Something like a legacy. June covered his hand with hers, remembering Thomas's last letter, a town worth believing in, a future worth building. I think, she said carefully, I'm ready to build that with you. All of it. The renovation plans, rustled beneath their clasped hands, blueprints for more than just buildings. They were maps to a future neither of them had expected to find in a small Wyoming town with a big heart and bigger dreams. The memory box sat open on June's coffee table, its contents spread out like fallen leaves. Marcus's rodeo buckles, Thomas's pocket watch, wedding photos, dried flowers from her bridal bouquet. Among them lay something new, the unfinished glass. Snowflake ornament Colt's mother had meant for her someday grandchild. Outside, Lost River celebrated Christmas Eve with renewed vigor. The streets glowed with lights. Carols drifted from the reopened theater where the town choir performed, and the smell of Mr. Peterson's famous hot chocolate wafted from the general store's new cafe section. Are you sure you're up for company? Tonight? Colt asked, arranging another log in the fireplace. Dr. Chen had finally lifted June's bed rest restrictions, but he still watched her like a hawk. I'm sure, June said, lifting a silver frame from the box. Christmas Eve was always family night at the Callahan house. Thomas and Margaret would host the whole town. She traced the photograph of her in-laws, standing proud on their front porch. Colt knelt beside her, his hand finding its now familiar place on her belly. Tell me about it. Everyone brought food. Margaret made these incredible cinnamon rolls. June smiled at the memory. Thomas would read The Night Before Christmas to all the kids. Then at midnight he'd lead everyone in singing carols on the front lawn. Is that why you invited the choir to stop here tonight? June nodded, tears threatening. It feels right, bringing it all back. The old traditions, but making them new. 2. A knock at the door interrupted them. Sarah entered bearing a large basket that filled the cottage with a familiar scent. Found this recipe card in Margaret Callahan's old files, she said, setting out still warm cinnamon rolls. Thought you might want them tonight. June's hands shook as she picked up one of the rolls. They're exactly like hers. More knocks followed. Dr. Chen arrived with her husband, then Mr. Peterson and his wife. The cottage filled with warmth and conversation, just as the Callahan house once had. June watched Colt move among their guests, no longer the distant billionaire, but a man who knew everyone's names, who asked about children and grandchildren, who belonged. She was arranging Margaret's rolls on her mother's old Christmas plate when she felt Colt slip something into her hand. A small velvet box. Not a ring, he whispered quickly, seeing her expression. Not yet. Just open it when you're ready. June waited until a lull in the party, when everyone was gathered around the fire trading stories about Lost River's past. The box opened, silently, to reveal a delicate gold charm shaped like a coat. "Oh, Colt," she breathed. "Look inside." She opened the tiny clasp. Engraved in miniature script were the words, "Love is warmth, freely given." Before she could respond, another knock drew their attention. Through the window, June could see the choir assembling on her small lawn, their faces lit by battery-operated candles. Right on schedule, just as they'd gathered at the Callahan house all those years ago. "Should we—" Colt gestured to the door. June gripped his hand. "Wait. There's something I need to say." She led him to the memory box, picking up the unfinished snowflake ornament. "Your mother never got to finish this, never got to see you become a father." She placed it in his hands. "But she'd be so proud of the man you are, the father you're going to be." Colt's fingers trembled around the delicate glass. "June, I've been keeping these memories in a box," she continued, touching the mementos of her life with Marcus, trying to preserve everything exactly as it was. But life doesn't work that way, does it? It keeps moving, growing, making room for new love alongside the old. Outside, the choir began to sing "Silent Night," the harmony floating through the winter air. Inside, their guests moved quietly to the windows, giving them space for this moment. June took the coat charm from its box, then reached for the chain around her neck that held her wedding ring. With steady fingers, she added the new charm alongside the old ring. "Both parts of my heart," she said softly. "Both kinds of love. Is that okay?" Colt gathered her close, mindful of her belly between them. "It's perfect," he whispered against her hair. "You're perfect." They joined their guests outside, where the choir's voices rose to the star-filled sky. June felt Colt's arms wrap around her from behind, their son moving between them, and thought about different kinds of warmth, the heat of a borrowed coat, the glow of a Christmas fire, the steady flame of love that refuses to die. It just transforms, like water into snow, like grief into healing, like two broken hearts learning to beat as one. The unfinished snowflake ornament caught the porch light from its new place on June's small tree, its incomplete pattern somehow more beautiful for being unfinished, like their story, like their love, like the endless possibility of new beginnings wrapped in the comfort of cherished memories. The birth certificate lay unsigned on the hospital table, its blank spaces waiting to be filled with a new life's details. June stared at it through exhausted eyes, one hand gripping Colt's, the other cradling their newborn son against her chest. "Thomas Marcus Callahan Merrick," she whispered, testing the weight of the name. The baby stirred, his tiny face turning toward her voice. He had Marcus's chin, she thought, but those eyes, when they'd briefly opened, were all Colt's, that same startling blue. "Are you sure?" Colt asked softly, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "About the Merrick part? He's a bridge," June said, touching the baby's cheek, "between what was and what will be, just like Lost River, just like us." The snow fell softly outside Lost River Regional's maternity ward. The same ward where she'd nearly lost him 2 months ago, the same ward Colt had bought to keep them safe. But this time, the room was filled with joy instead of fear, with beginnings instead of almost endings. Dr. Chen bustled in, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "Everything looks perfect," she announced, checking the babies, the vitals one more time. "Though I'd expect nothing less from Lost River's most stubborn patient and her equally stubborn support team." June laughed softly, remembering the long night of labor. Colt hadn't left her side for a moment, bearing her grip without complaint, whispering encouragement through each contraction. Even when she'd cried out for Marcus in a moment of pain-induced confusion, Colt had simply held her closer, understanding that love could hold multitudes. "The whole town's in the waiting room," Sarah reported, slipping in with fresh ice chips. "Mr. Peterson's stress baking has filled the hospital cafeteria with cookies, and the choir's asking permission to sing. Carols outside your window." "In February?" June asked, amused. "They say any day a baby comes to Lost River is Christmas." Sarah's eyes were suspiciously bright as she looked at the tiny bundle. "Especially this baby." Colt gathered the birth certificate, his hand steady. As he began filling in the details, date, time, parents' names, He paused at the last part. June? She understood his hesitation. The space for father's name seemed to echo with the weight of two men's love. One gone too soon, one found unexpectedly. But June had made her peace with this complexity weeks ago. Sign it, she said softly. You're his father in all the ways that matter now. Marcus would understand. As if in agreement, little Thomas chose that moment to open his eyes fully for the first time since birth, fixing Colt with a gaze so direct it made him catch his breath. "Hello, son," he whispered, voice rough with emotion. "Welcome to Lost River." A commotion outside drew their attention to the window. The entire town had gathered in the hospital parking lot, holding handmade signs and battery-operated candles. Through the glass, June could see familiar faces: Mr. Peterson with his basket of cookies, the choir in their robes, families from her writing classes, workers from the renovation projects, all coming together to welcome Lost River's newest citizen. "Your grandfather would be proud," June told the baby, thinking of Thomas's letters, his vision for the town, his inadvertent matchmaking from beyond. He knew love could rebuild anything. "Speaking of rebuilding," Colt said, reaching into his jacket pocket, "I have something for you both." He pulled out a small brass key, aged but polished to a shine. "The key to the Callahan house. The renovations are complete. 4 apartments for teachers and medical staff, but—" he hesitated. "I kept the main floor as a single unit. If you'd like to raise our son in his grandfather's home." June felt tears spill down her cheeks. "You didn't sell it. Even when you bought the town, you kept it for me, before you even knew me." "Thomas made me promise," Colt said simply, "and now I'm promising you, and him." He touched the baby's hand, marveling as tiny fingers gripped his thumb. A home, a family, a town worth believing in. Outside, someone started singing Amazing Grace, the harmony swelling as others joined in. Inside, June looked at the completed birth certificate, at the key to her past and future, at the 2 loves of her life, one sleeping peacefully in her arms, one watching them both with wondering eyes. "Sign it," she said again, reaching for Colt's hand. "Make it official. Make us whole." As Colt's pen moved across the paper, June felt the last pieces of her heart shift and settle. Thomas Marcus Callahan Merrick, born into love, named for the past, but facing firmly toward the future, just like the town that would always be his home. The engagement ring caught the light from the renovated theater's marquee, sending rainbow reflections dancing across June's palm. It wasn't new. She'd found that out when Colt had knelt before her on the theater's restored stage, in front of the entire town gathered for Lost River's New Year's celebration. "It was my mother's," he'd explained, voice trembling. "Like that unfinished snowflake ornament, she left it with a note. For the woman who teaches my son the true meaning of love." Now, hours later, they stood on the theater's balcony, watching fireworks paint the Wyoming sky. 3-month-old Thomas slept peacefully against June's chest, wrapped in a blanket she'd finally finished knitting, while below them, Lost River celebrated more than just a proposal. The town had bloomed in the year since June had given away her goat. The main street glowed with restored shopfronts, their windows displaying actual merchandise instead of dust. The Community Arts Center, housed in the theater's upper floor, had a waiting list for June's writing classes. Mr. Peterson had hired 3 new employees to handle the general store's expanded pharmacy and cafe. "Penny for your thoughts?" Colt's arms slipped around them both, his chin resting on June's shoulder. "Just thinking about Thomas's letters," she said, leaning back against him. "About building something that matters. And have we?" His breath was warm against her ear. "Built something worth believing in?" June looked down at their sleeping son, at the ring on her finger, at the town spread out before them like a painting coming back to life. "We've built more than that. We've built a home." A burst of laughter drew their attention to the street. Below, Dr. Chen was teaching her husband to dance in the middle of the blocked-off main street, while Sarah directed the choir in an impromptu performance. Children darted between adults' legs, waving sparklers that painted light trails in the dark. "Remember what you said to me that night?" Colt asked softly. "When you gave me your coat?" "Take care of it," June smiled. "It belonged to someone special. I didn't know then that you weren't just giving me warmth." His hand found hers, fingers intertwining. "You were giving me a future, a chance to be the man your father-in-law believed I could be." June turned in his arms, careful not to disturb Thomas. "And you've given me back everything I thought I'd lost. A home, a community, a chance to love again." The ring caught another flash of fireworks, but its sparkle couldn't match the light in Colt's eyes. "I have something else for you," he said, reaching into his jacket. "Well, for all of us." He pulled out an envelope thick with papers. June shifted Thomas to one arm so she could open it, her breath catching as she read the first page. "The Lost River Community Trust?" she questioned. "I'm transferring ownership of the town," Colt explained, "to a community foundation. The residents will have controlling interest with you and me as co-trustees." He touched Thomas's cheek gently. "So, our son will grow up in a town that truly belongs to its people." June's vision blurred with tears. "Like Thomas always wanted. There's more." Colt's voice held a note of nervous excitement. "The Callahan House Educational Fellowship. Full scholarships for Lost River students who want to become teachers, in honor of a certain writing instructor who never lost faith in the power of words to change lives." A happy squeal from below made them both look down. Mr. Peterson's granddaughter had just executed a perfect pirouette in her first-ever ballet. Shoes, a gift from the Community Arts Center's new dance program. "So," Colt said, his arms tightening around his family, "will you marry me? Help me run this foundation, raise our son in the town your first love helped preserve and my love helped restore." June looked at the ring that symbolized not just their future, but the future of Lost River itself, at their son, sleeping peacefully in the legacy of two families' dreams, at the town that had given her a second chance at everything. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, letting her voice carry to the celebration below. "Yes." The crowd erupted in cheers. Fireworks painted the sky with golden light, and somewhere, June could have sworn, she felt Thomas Callahan's approval flowing through the streets he'd loved so well. Thomas stirred against her chest, his blue eyes opening to take in the sparkling scene. June remembered another night, another moment of hope in the darkness, but this time, instead of giving away her last warm thing, she was surrounded by warmth. The love of a good man, the weight of their child, and the heart of a town that had taught them all the true meaning of home. The new winter coat hung in June's closet at the Callahan house, its dark blue wool a stark contrast to Marcus's weathered leather jacket, now preserved in a shadow box on the wall. The coat had appeared on her bed that morning, a note pinned to its collar in Colt's familiar handwriting. "For the woman who taught me that true warmth comes from the heart." June touched both coats as she dressed for her wedding rehearsal, feeling the texture of past and present beneath her fingers. 6 months had passed since Colt's proposal, and Lost River had transformed with the seasons. The spring thaw had brought new businesses. Summer had filled the streets with tourists drawn by the arts festival, and autumn had painted the town in colors as rich as its renewed spirit. "Mama!" Thomas's voice carrying his father's tone, but his grandfather's warmth drew her attention. He sat in his crib, 9 months old, and already full of Lost River's fighting spirit. Dr. Chen called him their miracle baby, the boy who'd survived the storm, who'd brought hope back to a ghost. "A town. Ready to practice your big moment, little man?" June scooped him up, breathing in his baby-sweet scent. They decided to hold the wedding in the restored theater, with Thomas riding down the aisle in a vintage pedal car Mr. Peterson had found in his store's attic. A knock at the door revealed Sarah, arms full of flower arrangements. "The choirs, rehearsing their piece," she reported, setting down her burden, "and Colt's pacing the theater lobby like a caged lion." June smiled, remembering another nervous man in another December. But where Marcus had faced their wedding with boyish excitement, Colt's anticipation ran deeper, tempered by loss, strengthened by understanding what it meant to find love twice in one lifetime. "Is that the coat?" Sarah asked, spotting the new addition to June's closet. "It's perfect for tomorrow's ceremony." She paused, careful with her next words. "The forecast says snow." "Of course it does," June said softly. Their story had begun in the snow. It felt right to seal it the same way. They made their way to the theater, Thomas babbling happily in June's arms. The marquee gleamed in the winter. Sunlight, announcing tomorrow's event with simple elegance, a Lost River love story. Below it, townspeople hurried about their evening routines, stopping at the general store's cafe, heading to classes at the arts center, living the vibrant life Thomas Callahan had always envisioned for his beloved town. Inside the theater, Colt stood on the stage, deep in conversation with Dr. Chen's husband about the community health program they were launching in January. He looked up when June entered, his face softening the way it always did when he saw them. "There's my family," he said, crossing to meet them. Thomas reached for him immediately, and June felt her heart swell watching them together. Her sons. Tiny hands patting Colt's cheeks, Colt's gentle kiss on the baby's forehead. "I found your gift," June said, touching his arm. "The coat. I wanted you to have something warm that was just yours," he explained. "Not a replacement for Marcus's coat. Nothing could replace that. But something new for our new life together." June stood on tiptoe to kiss him, ignoring Sarah's theatrical throat-clearing about saving it for the ceremony. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "Everything's perfect." The rehearsal flowed smoothly, each element a testimony to the town's revival. The choir, stronger than ever with members from 3 neighboring communities. The decorations, crafted by June's art students. The menu, featuring Mr. Peterson's famous cinnamon rolls, alongside dishes from Lost River's new restaurants. As they practiced their vows, words they'd written together about second chances and small-town miracles, June felt Marcus's presence, like a gentle blessing. He was there in Thomas's laugh, in the theater's restored grandeur, in the community's resilient spirit. Later, standing in the theater's entrance while Sarah reviewed tomorrow's schedule, June watched snow begin to fall. Colt wrapped his arms around her from behind, Thomas sleeping against his shoulder. "Having second thoughts?" he asked softly, but his voice held no real worry. "Only about how long I waited to say yes," June replied, leaning back against him. "To this, to us, to everything." Through the glass doors, they could see Lost River preparing for tomorrow's celebration. The main street twinkled with lights, wreaths hung on every lamppost, and warmth spilled from every doorway. Like the town itself, their love story had come. Full circle, from a desperate act of kindness on a frozen night to a joy so complete it could warm an entire community. June touched the sleeve of her new coat, then reached up to stroke Marcus's old one in its frame. 2 coats, 2 loves, 1 heart big enough to hold them both. Tomorrow she would walk down the aisle toward her future, carried forward by the past's gentle blessing and Lost River's endless capacity for revival. The family portrait sat on the mantel of the Callahan house, taken on a snowy evening, exactly 1 year after June and Colt's wedding. In it, June wore both her coats, Marcus's leather jacket over her shoulders, Colt's blue wool wrapped around. Thomas as she held him. Colt stood behind them, one hand resting protectively over June's newly rounded belly, his mother's snowflake ornament catching the light beside them on the Christmas tree. "Tell me again," Thomas demanded, his 2-year-old voice carrying across the living room where the family gathered for their evening tradition. "About the coat and the snow." June exchanged a smile with Colt as their son climbed into his father's lap, blue eyes bright with anticipation for a story he'd heard countless times. Through the window, Lost River's main street glowed with holiday lights, and the sound of carolers drifted up from the theater where the Art Center's winter showcase was just letting out. "Well," June began, one hand resting on her growing bump, Once upon a time, in this very town, there was a coat that held all the warmth in the world, and a lady with a baby in her tummy, Thomas added, patting her belly where his sister grew. Like Mama now. That's right, Colt continued, pulling June closer on the couch, and one cold night she found a man who needed that warmth more than she did. Even though it was her last warm thing, Thomas recited solemnly, snuggling deeper into Colt's embrace. The doorbell chimed, and Sarah's voice called out from the foyer, "Special delivery!" She entered carrying a large box, followed by Mr. Peterson with his signature cinnamon rolls and Dr. Chen with her husband. It was Sunday evening, family dinner night at the Callahan house, a tradition June and Colt had started after their wedding, opening their home just as Thomas and Margaret had once done. "The latest enrollment figures for spring," Sarah announced, setting down the box. "The Arts Center's writing program is completely full, and we've had inquiries from 3 more towns about replicating Lost River's community trust model." June watched their friends settle into their usual spots. Dr. Chen in Margaret's old rocking chair, Mr. Peterson at the piano he'd helped restore, Sarah curled up by the fire. The house felt right like this, full of love and laughter and possibility. And, "Look what we found in the theater archives," Sarah added, pulling out a faded photograph. It showed Thomas Callahan standing in front of the theater's original marquee, arm around a much younger Colt. "His last Christmas festival, I think." "He knew," Colt said softly, taking the photo. "Somehow, he knew Lost River would bring us all together." Thomas squirmed off his father's lap to peer at the picture. "Is that my grandpa, the one who loved the town like we do?" "Just like we do," June confirmed, watching her son trace Thomas Callahan's smile with a tiny finger. Outside, snow began to fall, fat flakes dancing in the streetlights like nature's own celebration. The carolers' voices grew stronger as they approached the house, a new tradition, ending each showcase by singing at the Callahan house where Lost River's renaissance had begun. June recognized her writing students among them, their voices blending with the choir's in perfect harmony. "Time for hot chocolate on the porch," Colt announced, scooping up Thomas. "Ready to greet our guests, partner." As their friends gathered coats and moved toward the door, June lingered by the portrait, touching the frame gently. So much had changed in 2 years. The town, their family, her heart. Yet somehow, everything that mattered had stayed the same. The warmth of kindness freely given, the strength of a community bound by love, the magic of second chances. Coming, love. Colt called from the porch, where Thomas was trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue. June grabbed both her coats, smiling at their different weights, their different memories, their different loves. Outside, Lost River waited in its winter glory, as alive as Thomas Callahan had always dreamed it could be. "I'm here," she said, stepping into the snow-swept night, into the arms of her family, into the heart of their ever-warming world. "I'm home." Above them, the stars shone down on Lost River, on a town that had found its way back to life, on a family built from loss and hope and courage, on a love story that began with a coat and ended with a legacy of warmth that would warm generations to come.